The entire pack bowed when the Alpha King entered the Grand Hall of Karamor. Mireska pressed her forehead against the cold flagstones and willed herself to become invisible. The scrub brush in her hand froze mid-stroke. The bucket of gray water at her side trembled with the vibration of so many knees striking stone at once. 500 wolves, every noble house of the realm, every pack leader sworn to the moon throne. All of them lowered their heads as the ancient doors opened and the heir of the first wolf walked into the hall. She did not dare look up. She had been given strict instructions by the steward of the hearth that morning. Finish the northern aisle before the bells strike noon. Do not be seen. Do not be heard. Do not shame your house. The last word had been spoken with such contempt that she had understood at once what had happened. Someone had told them. Someone had whispered that the scullery maid from the lower kitchens had been seen leaving the king's private solar before dawn. That the silver pendant she wore beneath her collar had come from his own hand. That the mark hidden at the hollow of her throat, just above her collarbone, had been placed there by royal teeth on the night of the first frost. So they had sent her to scrub the entrance aisle during the most sacred ceremony of the age. Not to punish her, Mireska understood. To destroy her. To make certain that when the Alpha King walked through these doors to announce his chosen queen, his maid of fate would be on her knees with a brush in her hand, watching him pass and unable to do a single thing about it. She had come anyway, because the letter he had slipped beneath her door 3 days ago had told her to trust him, because he had written 3 words in his own hand at the bottom of that letter. Nothing will change. And because the secret she now carried beneath the apron she had tied around her waist would give her no choice but to trust. The bowing was complete. The hall was silent. She could hear him walking. Rovan of the Moon Throne did not move like other men. She had learned that, in the 6 months since the first night he had found her in the royal gardens and mistaken her for a lost noblewoman. He moved as though gravity paid him a different tax than it collected from lesser wolves. Each step had weight without sound. Each breath was drawn with the patience of something that had been alive for longer than men could count. He was walking toward her. Mireska closed her eyes. She prayed to every god she had ever learned the name of. She prayed he would not stop. She prayed he would not look down. She prayed that just this once, the fate that had tied them together in secret would have the mercy to untie them in public. The footsteps stopped. They stopped directly beside her bucket. She could smell him now. Pine and storm water and the faint trace of the salve she had pressed into his palm the week before, when he had cut his hand on the wolf-bone blade. Her mouth went dry. Her whole body shook. A single word fell into the silence of the hall. Mireska. He had said it so quietly that no one else could have heard. She heard it only because the bond between them, incomplete as it was, carried every sound he made directly into the hollow of her chest. She heard it because the mark on her throat went hot the moment his breath passed it. She did not look up. She could not look up. If she looked up, every noble in the hall would rise from their bow and see what she was to him, and the game House Dravis had been playing for the last year would end in her death before the day was out. So she kept her forehead to the stone and her eyes shut, and she prayed. And Rovan, after a long, dangerous moment, walked on. Only when the doors at the far end of the hall swung open to admit him to the throne chamber did the pack rise from their bows. Only then did Mireska let herself breathe. She gathered her bucket and brush and stumbled into the nearest shadow, the eastern gallery where the candle boys hid between processions. She pressed her back against the pillar and tried not to weep. Her hand moved to the hollow of her throat. The mark was still hot. Beneath her apron, her other hand found the curve of her belly and pressed against the life that had begun there, and she thought, for the first time in 3 months, that perhaps it would be all right after all. He had seen her. He had said her name. He had not looked away. Surely now he would choose her. From the shadow of the eastern gallery, she watched them lead the 5 candidates up the steps of the dais. Daughters of the most powerful bloodlines in Karamor, each one trained from birth for this possibility. And at their center, with hair the color of bleached bone and eyes like chips of winter sky, walked Morwenna of House Dravas. The High Elder lifted the ceremonial cloak from its silver stand and placed it upon the king's shoulders. Mireska noticed it only in passing. A heavy thing, dark silver, embroidered with the runes of the 7 first wolves. The elder's hands shook slightly as he fastened the clasp at Rovin's throat. "Rovin of the Moon Throne," the elder intoned. "Blood of the first wolf, keeper of the silver law. You have heard the counsel of the pack. The realm awaits your choice." The silence stretched. Mireska pressed her hand harder against the mark. "Choose me." The bond between them pulsed. She felt his pulse answering hers, steady and strong and present. He would choose her. She knew it. She had not believed it an hour ago, but she believed it now, after hearing her own name on his breath in front of the whole bowed pack. Rovin stepped forward, and then something strange passed across his face. Something slow and distant, as though a curtain had been drawn behind his eyes. His shoulders straightened in a way they had never straightened before her. His jaw loosened. The faint amber light that had always lived in his gaze, even at the heart of council, went flat and gray. He raised his hand toward the candidates. "I choose," he said, and the voice was his and not his, a hollow thing, a voice wrapped in grave cloth, Morwenna of House Dravas. The hall erupted. Mireska did not hear the cheering. She did not hear the stamping of feet, or the howls of approval, or the whispered congratulations of the noble wives. She heard only a ringing, high and thin and endless, and she felt only the mark at the hollow of her throat, going from hot to scalding, scalding to searing, until it felt as though Rovin's teeth had returned to her flesh to tear themselves out again. She doubled over against the pillar. A sob broke from her throat and was drowned by the noise of the hall. She did not see the High Elder steal a glance toward the upper gallery, where Lord Malgeth Dravas stood with both hands folded behind his back and the faintest smile upon his mouth. She did not see, because she was already running. Mireska did not remember the corridors. She remembered only the brush of her own breath and the hot iron at the hollow of her throat, and the sound of her feet striking stone in a rhythm that was almost a word. Gone, gone, gone. The servants' passages behind the grand hall were empty that afternoon because every soul in Caremore had been sent to witness the choosing, and so she ran through them unseen, past the laundry yards, past the butcher's cold room, past the narrow stair that led up to the chamber she had been given when she first came to the castle as a girl of 16. She did not go to that chamber. She went to the smaller one beside it, the one tucked behind the copper cistern where no one ever looked, the one she had moved to in secret 3 months ago when her body had begun to change, and hiding had become a matter of survival. The door swung open under her shaking hand. She sat on the narrow bed and waited for the shaking to stop. It did not stop. She began to pack instead. She took the things her hands knew without her mind. 2 dresses, 1 gray, 1 green, both loose enough to hide the rounding of her belly. The small iron amulet her mother had left her, engraved with a crescent moon, worn almost to nothing. A pouch of the herbs she had been gathering for the sickness that came on her in the early mornings. A packet of the ground silver leaf the midwife of the lower kitchens had slipped her, no questions asked, the week before last. The letter he had sent her 3 days ago, because she could not bear to leave it behind and could not bear to leave it for another to find. She did not take the pendant he had given her. She set it on the rough wooden table beside the bed and stood looking at it for a long moment. A small silver wolf no larger than her thumb, hung on a chain finer than hair. He had placed it around her neck on the first night he had claimed her in the clearing beneath the hollow oak, and he had whispered against the mark at her throat that so long as she wore it, he would know where she was in the world. She understood now that this was the reason she could not take it. If he wished to find her, he would have to find her without it. She pulled on her cloak. She picked up her bundle. She turned once at the door and looked at the narrow bed where she had lain 3 nights ago with her hand on her belly practicing the words she had meant to tell him that evening. "Goodbye," she said to the empty chamber. Then she ran. The lower kitchens were empty, as she had known they would be, all save one. Old Henna sat at the long table with her hands folded around a clay cup of small beer, her good eye fixed on the door Mireska was about to pass through. Mireska froze. Henna did not speak. Henna lifted her cup to her mouth and drank, and while she drank her good eye did not leave Mireska's face, and Mireska understood, in the way that one servant understands another, that Henna had known for a long time, had perhaps known from the beginning. Henna set the cup down. She reached into the pocket of her apron. She drew out something small and wrapped in oiled cloth and set it on the table. She pushed it toward Mireska without a word. Mireska took it. It was warm. A small loaf of the black bread Henna baked for the midwives in the West Wing, wrapped around what felt to Mireska's numb fingers like the weight of a silver coin. "The eastern gate is unlocked tonight, child," Henna said. Her voice was low and creaking and held nothing but the simple delivery of a fact. "Old Baron will not come on his rounds until the 3rd bell. You have until then." Mireska opened her mouth and could not speak. "Go," Henna said, "and do not come back here. Not for him. Not for anyone. Do you hear me?" Mireska nodded. She could not trust her voice. "May the old moon see you safe," Henna said, and she lifted her cup again and drank, and did not watch her leave. Mireska passed through the eastern gate in the last blue light of the day. The winter was beginning to loosen its teeth on the land, but the wind was still cold and the forest was still black. She did not stop to look back at the castle walls. She did not allow herself. She walked east along the shepherd's track for as far as her legs would carry her, and when they would carry her no further, she walked north along the deer paths that ran beneath the ancient pines. Somewhere toward midnight she began to weep, and she wept as she walked, and still she did not stop. She did not see the tower of the king's western wing behind her. She did not see the shutters of the king's private chamber burst outward at the 3rd bell with the force of a man who had been locked inside for hours and had finally remembered his own name. She did not see Rovan of the Moon Throne, the ceremonial cloak burning in strips around his shoulders, where his own claws had shredded it, haul himself through the window by his own bleeding hands and drop to the parapet 2 stories below and begin to run. She did not hear the bellow that went up from his throat when he reached her chamber and found the bed made and the pendant on the table, and the warmth of her gone from the room by 9 hours and more. She did not hear the howl that answered his, nor the one that answered that, nor the 3rd howl from the high towers of the eastern barracks. She did not hear a whole city of wolves waking in the dark to the sound of their king calling for a woman no one in Caremore was supposed to know existed. She walked until the sun began to pale the eastern sky, and then she walked further. By first light she was 11 miles from the castle. By midday she was 20, sheltering in the lee of a grain cart whose driver did not know her name. By nightfall of the 2nd day, she was 40 miles from Caremore and moving steadily into the northern hill country where no noble of House Dravas would think to send his hounds. By the time the Alpha King was made to understand what had been done to him on the day of his choosing, Mireska had crossed 2 rivers, traded her green dress for a gray shawl, given the silver coin Henna had pressed on her to a woman whose wagon had taken her the final 10 miles of a long day, and passed through the crooked stone arch that marked the boundary of a village called Hollowbriar. She had another name by then. She did not know how long she would be allowed to keep it. 3 months had taught the village of Hollowbriar to forget it had a newcomer. She had arrived in the dead of winter, a widow, she said, from a burnt-out farm 3 valleys east, traveling alone because her husband and his pack had not survived the fire. The village elder had looked at her swollen belly and her hollow eyes and the frost in her hair and had not asked further questions. He had offered her the stone cottage at the forest edge that had stood empty since old good Mother Revel had been taken by the winter fever 2 autumns ago. He had offered it in exchange for the service her hands could render, and she had accepted before he had finished speaking. So she had become Linnet. Linnet the healer, the villagers called her, because her hands seemed to know things that other hands did not. She set the blacksmith's boy's broken wrist and it knit straight in 10 days. She brewed a tea for the miller's coughing daughter, and by the second full moon the child was chasing geese in the mud again. She drew her herbs from the forest and from the banks of the slow gray river behind the church, and used them in ways good Mother Revel had never known. She did not speak often. The villagers thought she was sad. They were gentle with her. Small kindnesses appeared on her doorstep without a note attached, and no one asked her to give thanks for any of them. Linnet was grateful. Linnet was careful. Linnet was almost, on the calmer days, almost a woman who had never been anyone else. But at night, in the cottage at the forest edge, she was still Mireska. At night she lay on the narrow pallet with both hands on the hard round of her belly, and she felt her children kick against her palms, and sometimes the kicks came from 2 different places at once, as if 2 small feet were pushing in opposite directions. The midwife of the village had touched her stomach on the first new moon of spring, and had looked up at her with a face full of slow, unwilling wonder. "There are 2 of them, Linnet," the old woman had said. "I would not have believed it of a woman your size, but there are 2. Linnet had thanked her and said nothing else, and after the midwife had gone she had wept for an hour without making a sound, and at night, the mark at the hollow of her throat refused to heal. She had watched it, in the small mirror she had hung by the door of the cottage, and she had seen what no scar should do. Among the wolf kind, a rejected claim should fade within a fortnight, leaving only smooth skin and the grief of a faithless lover. Hers had not faded, it had deepened. And on nights when the moon rose clear above the pines, the mark glowed. A soft silver light, no brighter than star shine through a veil. But there, she would press her fingers to it in the dark and feel the pulse of something beneath her skin that was not her own heart. She had told no one. There was no one in Hollowbriar she could tell. When the light was strongest, she dreamed. She dreamed of a silver river running through a pine forest she did not know, and of a man standing on the far bank. She could not see his face, only the shape of him, broad-shouldered and still, watching the current as though he had been waiting a very long time for something to come down it. She always tried to cross the water. She never reached the other side. And always, just before she woke, the man on the far bank would turn his head as though he had finally heard her. On the 17th night of the 3rd month, the dream came harder than it had ever come. She woke before dawn with the silver mark at her throat, burning so brightly she could see its light on the inside of her own sleeve. The twins had gone still within her. She did not know what that meant. In the morning, she went to the market. The market of Hollowbriar was a small thing, a dozen stalls in the square beside the church, but on the first day of the new moon, there were always traders from the East Road. Mireska had learned to listen to traders. Traders carried news the villagers did not have. On this morning, the news was of the king. She heard it first from the apple woman, who had heard it from her husband, who had heard it from a wool merchant down from the capital. She heard it again from a traveling tinker whose voice was low and cautious, as though he knew such news was a dangerous thing to carry. The Alpha King had lost his mind. The tinker said it plainly. The king of Caremore had not slept in 94 days. He had dismissed his council. He had placed his own chosen bride, Morwenna of House Dravas, under house arrest within her own family seat, and had not spoken to her since the 3rd day after the choosing. He had sent every wolf who owed him fealty to the far corners of the realm, searching for a woman whose name no public document contained. The crops in the northern provinces were failing. The wolves of the border packs had grown feral and were attacking livestock in the open daylight. A reward of 20,000 gold sovereigns had been posted in every town for any information leading to the discovery of the woman the king was looking for. "What woman?" the apple seller asked. "That is the thing," the tinker said. No one knows. The king will not say her name. His first beta, Lord Gareth, will not confirm she exists. But every rider who enters Caremore is searched. Every wagon is stopped. They are looking for a ghost. And the kingdom is being pulled apart in the search. Mireska paid for her bread with hands she could not feel. She walked home along the church path with the blood loud in her ears. Her mark was hot. Her children were moving. Somewhere far to the south and west, in a castle she had fled in the dark, a man who had chosen another was tearing his realm apart looking for her. She did not understand. She did not understand, because she did not yet know what had been woven into the cloak at his shoulders on the day of the choosing, and she did not yet know that the man she had watched choose Morwenna had not been woven at all, but a body moving under the weight of a rune 3 generations in the making. She knew only that a king who had publicly rejected her should not now be breaking his own kingdom apart in her absence, unless he had never rejected her. Unless the thing she had watched at the choosing had been a lie made of silver thread and borrowed breath. She reached her cottage with her heart hammering against her ribs, and the twins inside her moving as though they too had felt the shape of what she had just understood. She closed the door behind her. She set the bread on the table. And then she looked up, and through the single window above the hearth, she saw the wolves. There were 5 of them. They stood at the tree line in a staggered half-circle, the way a hunting pack stands when it has decided where the prey will break. Their coats were the color of new iron. Their eyes, even across the distance of her yard, caught the afternoon light and threw it back in small hot coins of amber. They were not Rovin's wolves. She knew the color of Rovin's wolves. Rovin's wolves were the gray of stormwater and the black of peat smoke. These animals were iron-coated, and they were waiting with the awful patience of something that had been paid to be certain. Mireska did not move. The mark at her throat began to burn. And then, beneath the burning, she felt something else. A presence. Not one presence, but 2. Close and close and closer still. And she understood at last that the iron wolves at the tree line had not come alone. A fist struck the door of the cottage. 3 hard knocks, deliberate and unhurried. A man's voice spoke through the wood. It was not a voice she knew. It was calm and low, and it carried the weight of a messenger who had ridden a very long way to deliver a single word. "Mireska," the voice said. "Open the door." Mireska's hand went to the silver knife she kept on the mantel. She had kept it there since her 3rd day in the cottage, not because she had ever expected to use it, but because the weight of it in her palm had been a comfort on the nights when the wind moved wrong in the pines. She took it now. She set the edge against the soft pad of her thumb and felt the cold of the steel and thought of the door and the voice beyond it, and the 5 iron wolves waiting at the tree line. "Mistress," the voice said again, more gently, "you need not be afraid of me. I would not have ridden 9 days without sleep to harm you." "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice came out thin but steady. "My name is Gareth. I am first beta to the Alpha King of Caremore, and the wolves at your tree line are not my wolves. They came in the night. They have been circling the village for 3 days. If you open this door, I will stand between them and you for as long as I have breath." She did not open the door. "Prove it," she said. A long silence. Then, through the wood, "You bear a claiming mark at the hollow of your throat. It was placed there by the king's own teeth on the night of the first frost, under the hollow oak in the royal gardens where he first found you. The king has described that mark to every beta in the realm, so that we would know you if we found you. Only 3 men alive have heard him describe it. I am one of the 3. Mireska's knees almost gave. She opened the door. Gareth stood on her threshold with his hands spread wide and empty. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, his hair more gray than brown, his eyes the dull amber of old mead. Behind him stood 2 younger wolves in leather and mail, their gazes fixed not on her, but on the tree line. They did not look at her. They looked at everything else. "Come in," she said. "Only you." Gareth stepped inside. The door closed behind him. The 2 guards took up positions in her small yard, one facing the pines, one facing the road. "Sit, if you will," Mireska said. She did not sit. She stood with the silver knife still loose in her hand and the claiming mark burning at her throat, and the twins moving like small fish inside her. Gareth did not sit either. He took off his riding gloves, finger by finger, and laid them on her table with a care that seemed disproportionate to the moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. The king did not choose the Lady Morwenna. Mireska had been bracing for words for 3 months. She had rehearsed what she would say to Rovan if she ever stood before him again, how she would refuse him, how she would cut him with her silence, how she would never give him the satisfaction of her tears. She had not rehearsed these words. These words went straight past all her armor and struck her in the hollow of the chest, and her knees gave for the second time in one afternoon. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. "I watched him choose her," she whispered. "You watched a body choose her," Gareth said, "not the man inside it." He drew a folded parchment from the inside of his coat and set it on the table beside his gloves. He did not ask her to read it. He explained it in the plainest words he had. "The cloak," he said, "the ceremonial cloak of the choosing, the one that had passed from king to king since the founding of the realm. It had been laid upon Rovan's shoulders by the High Elder himself, as tradition required, and none of them, not one, had thought to examine the threads. The threads had been replaced. A single silver strand running through the embroidered runes had been replaced with a woven filament of something older and darker, a binding weave that 3 generations of House Dravus had worked to perfect for exactly one purpose. It suppressed the wolf. It severed the will from the voice. It allowed the body to move and the mouth to speak, while the mind was pressed down beneath a water that would not let it rise. The effect, Gareth said, had lasted 3 days. 3 days, Mireska repeated, and her voice did not sound like her own. He fought it from the first moment. Even pressed down, he fought. 2 of his attendants found claw marks on the inside of his own chamber door at the 3rd bell, put there by hands he did not remember raising. He broke out of that chamber at the changing of the guard, and when he reached your room and found it empty, he tore the eastern wing of the castle apart with his hands. I was there. I held him off the High Elder, who had fled and been caught at the south gate. I held him off long enough that he did not kill the old man before we had a chance to ask questions. She closed her eyes. "And," she said. "And the High Elder broke on the 2nd day of questioning. Lord Malgath of House Dravus has been paying him for 11 years. The whole ceremony was choreographed, mistress. Every candle, every bowed head, every spoken line. The only part of the choosing that was not written into the script was the name the king spoke at the dais, and that they could not script. They could only arrange the conditions under which his wolf would be silent and his mouth would be open, and hope the most powerful daughter of their house would be the one standing closest when the moment came. And she was, Mireska said. She was. She opened her eyes. Gareth was watching her with something very close to pain. "I have to ask you," he said. "Forgive me, but I have to ask. Do you carry the king's child?" Her hand went to her belly before she could stop it. "2," she said. Gareth closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, there was something like awe in them, and something like fear. "He does not know," he said. "No. He has been looking for you for 94 days, mistress, and he does not know that you have been carrying his heirs into exile all that time. What that man will do when he learns it, I cannot guess. I only know I must bring you back before he tears this realm apart looking for you." "I cannot go back," Mireska heard herself say. "House Dravus will kill me before I reach the castle gates." "Which is why the king does not yet know your exact whereabouts." Gareth tapped the parchment on the table. "This came into my hands 4 nights ago. It was sent by Raven from the Dravus seat to a paid agent in the eastern provinces. We intercepted it at the crossroads. I have kept it from the king for as long as I could, because I feared what he would do if he read it before I reached you." She took the parchment in hands that were not entirely hers. She unfolded it. It said, in a clean, unhurried hand that she would later learn belonged to Lord Malgeth himself, that the Moon Girl had been located in the northern hill country, that the problem would be eliminated before the waxing moon was full, and that long live the Queen. The waxing moon, Mireska thought dimly. That was tonight. There is something else, she said, her voice thin. Something I did not tell you when you asked. Gareth waited. He did not know what I was. When he marked me, he did not know. I never told him. My mother made me promise. What are you, mistress? She did not answer him. She could not make her mouth shape the word her mother had told her never to shape. She only turned her left wrist and showed him the thin silver scar across the inside of it, the one her mother had cut there on the night of her 12th birthday, the old mark of the line. Gareth looked at it. Gareth went very pale. Old gods, he breathed. Old gods of the moon and the dark water. He marked a moonline daughter. He did not know, and he marked a moonline daughter. And the Dravas have spent 3 generations learning to hunt exactly what you are. The first arrow came through her window before she could say the word aloud. Glass exploded across the stone floor. Gareth was moving before the second arrow struck, his body throwing hers sideways off the bed and onto the hearthstone. One hand clamped across the back of her head to keep her from striking the mantel. From the yard came a howl of warning, and then the wet, heavy sound of a wolf striking a wolf at speed. The Dravas were already among them. The cottage shuddered under a second arrow. The tip of it punched through the plank wall above the hearth and embedded in the post beside Gareth's head. Mireska saw the black gloss of the fletching and the slow dark seep along the shaft that could only be one thing. Poisoned, she said. Wolf's bite, Gareth answered. He had not lifted his head from over hers. They are not trying to take you. They are trying to finish you quickly. She could hear the fighting in the yard now, the rasp of shifted throats, the heavy breaking of bodies against the woodpile, the wet crack of bone. Her 2 guards were good. They had held off all 5 iron wolves for perhaps 30 heartbeats. She did not think they would hold 30 more. Cellar, Gareth said, now. There is no way out of the cellar. You do not need a way out. You need to live until I can reach the tree line. You cannot hold 5 wolves alone, and one of them is not a wolf. He looked at her. She saw him understand what she had understood a breath ago, that the pressure at the back of her skull was not the ordinary weight of fear. Someone in the yard was human. Someone in the yard was a Dravas. Cellar, Gareth said again, and he pulled her to her feet and pushed her toward the back of the cottage, and then he went through the window shoulder first and shifted midair into the gray wolf she had always suspected he must be. Mireska did not go to the cellar. She stood in the middle of her little cottage with the broken glass under her bare feet and the smell of winter air coming through the ruined window, and she understood, for the first time in 3 months, the truth of what her hands were for. She had been told, when she was a child of 6, that she must never show the silver in her blood. Her mother had held her by the shoulders in a barley field at dusk and had made her promise, not to the healer, not to the priest, not to any wolf who asked her. The moon line was ended, her mother had said. The moon line had been ended for 200 years. If any of the great houses learned that a daughter of that line still walked in the world, that daughter would not walk long. So Mireska had promised. And she had kept her promise through 23 winters. But her mother was dead, and the silver in her blood was not. And the twins inside her were moving in a way that felt, for the first time, like a request. She opened her hands, palms up, and let it come. The light was not gold. It had never been gold. The women of the moon line had burned with the cold white fire that lives at the bottom of a lake on the night of a full moon, and Mireska's light was that light, pale as bone meal and clean as first snow, and it rose from her palms without effort, as though it had been waiting all her life for her to stop pushing it down. She walked through her ruined window into the yard. The effect was exactly what her mother had warned her it would be. Every wolf in the clearing turned to look at her, even the iron wolves, even the ones that had been built and bred and disciplined against the sight of such a thing. Their formation broke. Two of them flattened themselves to the ground as though a greater wolf had walked into the clearing. The third lifted its muzzle and keened, a sound with no predator in it at all. "Move," Mireska said to them, and her voice was not entirely her own. They moved. Two broke for the pines. The third circled her once, slowly, and then lay down in the snow and placed its chin on its paws and would not be driven up. Gareth, his flank bleeding and his left hind leg at a bad angle, staggered out of the tangle beside the woodpile and came to stand at her shoulder. He did not speak. Wolves do not speak. But he watched her hands, and he watched the iron wolf on the ground at her feet, and he understood. The human in the yard did not run. She stood at the edge of the tree line in a long dark coat and a mask of carved wolf bone, a crossbow steady in her hands, and she did not flinch from the silver light the way her wolves had flinched. She was beyond the reach of her own pack's instincts because she had stopped obeying them a long time ago. "The moon girl," the masked woman said, almost to herself. She sounded pleased. "My father will want to know." Mireska recognized the voice. She had heard it in the corridors of the Caremore castle the winter before last, cutting a scullery boy to ribbons over a spilled bowl of soup. Vesa Drevas, Morwenna's younger sister, the clever one, the one who was said never to miss. The crossbow lifted. Mireska tried to reach for the silver again and found it thinner than before. The holding of the wolves had cost her. The holding of two children in her body had cost her. She stood at the edge of her own yard with her palms open and her reserves running low, and she watched Vesa Drevas sight along the quarrel at the hollow of her throat, at the very spot where Rovin's mark had been. Vesa's finger tightened on the trigger, and the forest exploded. It was not a figure of speech. An 80-year pine at the near edge of the tree line came out of the ground by its roots, as something behind it drove forward, and the crown of the tree came down across Vesa's line of fire and knocked the quarrel wide by 3 feet. Mireska heard it sing past her ear. She heard it strike the stone of her chimney and shatter. Then she heard the thing that had come through the trees. It was enormous. It was moving faster than any wolf she had ever seen move. It cleared the yard in a single bound, and it took Vesa Drevas off her feet before she could reload, and it closed its jaws on the mask of carved wolf bone and on the face beneath the mask, and it shook her once, hard, and flung her broken body back into the pines it had come through. It turned in the center of the yard with its shoulders low and its ears flat. The blood of a Drevas was on its muzzle. Its fur was the black of peat smoke in the hour before dawn. Its eyes, when they found Mireska, were the amber of a fire so old it had begun to go white at the heart. She knew it. She had known it from the sound of the tree coming out of the ground. "Rovin," she said. The black wolf did not move for a long moment. It stood as though it did not trust its own feet. Then it walked to her, one slow step at a time, and when it reached her, it lowered its huge head and pressed the broad bone of its muzzle, very gently, against the round of her belly. The twins inside her answered. 2 kicks, one from each side, almost together. The black wolf made a sound Mireska had never heard a wolf make in her life, a small, broken, half-swallowed thing, and the shift came over it the way weather comes over a mountain. A man knelt in the blood-stained snow of her yard. His hands hovered above her stomach as though he did not dare touch. His face, when he lifted it to her, was wet, and his eyes were not the eyes of an alpha king. They were the eyes of a man who had been looking for something for 94 days and had just, by the grace of a god he did not know he believed in, found it. Mireska had imagined this moment for 94 nights. She had imagined rage. She had imagined the cold dignity of a woman who had survived him. She had imagined him dragging her back to Caremore in a wagon, and all the ways she would refuse to weep in front of him on that road. She had never imagined him kneeling in the snow with his hands shaking above her belly and his eyes wet and his throat working around a word he could not make. "May I?" he asked finally. 3 words. She had once been able to refuse him nothing, and he had known it. He was asking now because he no longer assumed he had the right. She took his hand and pressed it to the round of her belly. The twins kicked at once, both at once, against his palm. He made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, and was neither of those things in the end. 2, he whispered. 2. For a moment she let him keep his hand where it was, because she was not yet strong enough to pull it away. Then she was strong enough, and she did. She stepped back from him. She wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders, and she looked down at the most powerful wolf in the realm kneeling in the snow of her yard, and she said the thing she had rehearsed for 94 nights. "You do not get to weep, Rovan." He did not lift his head. "You do not get to kneel in my yard and weep, as though the grief is yours to spend. I watched you choose her. I stood in the eastern gallery and I watched you take her hand, and I watched you speak her name, and I ran from that hall with our children inside me, and I have not stopped running since. Whatever was done to you, it was not done in the dark with a sob in the throat and a hand on the belly. Whatever was done to me was." He lifted his head then. His face was wrecked. She made herself look at it. "You are right," he said. His voice was not the voice she remembered. It was rough, as though he had been shouting for a very long time, as though whatever had been making sounds inside his throat for 3 months had worn the inside of it down. "You are right, and I have no argument against any word of it. Do not agree with me. I do not want you to agree with me. I want you to tell me. Tell you what, my heart. Tell me how a man can wear a woman's claiming mark on his own body and still say another woman's name at an altar in front of the whole realm. Tell me how that can happen and still be love, because if you cannot tell me that, Rovan, then I do not know what I am looking at, and I do not know what to do with these 2 children." He closed his eyes. He pressed his forehead to the snow for one long breath. When he lifted his face again, he told her. He told her of the cloak. He told her of waking 3 days later in a chamber he had half destroyed with his own hands, of the high elder whimpering on the floor of the south gate, of the quiet uncovering of 11 years of Dravis gold in the elder's ledgers. He told her of the search, of the nights he had not slept, of the mornings his betas had found him with his hands bloodied from striking stone walls because the bond had gone quiet for an hour and he had thought he had lost her. He told her of the dream of a silver river and of a woman on the far bank he could not reach. At that last thing, Mireska's breath caught. "You dreamed of me?" "Every night since the 3rd night, a river I could not cross, a shape on the far bank that would not turn its face to me." "I dreamed you too." He stared at her. "I dreamed you," she said again, and this time her voice broke on it. "Across the water. Every night. Your face I could not see, but I knew the shape of you. I thought it was only my grief. I thought my own heart was making it up to keep me alive." "It was not your heart," he said. "It was mine." She was weeping then. She did not remember when she had started. He rose from his knees and did not touch her, and did not touch her, and waited. He waited until she was the one who took the step. And when she did, he closed his arms around her and held her as though he had at last remembered how. Against the side of his neck, where no claiming mark had ever been, she felt him shaking. "I will never choose another voice over yours again," he said into her hair, "for as long as breath is in me, not in waking, not in sleeping, not under any cloak that any hand may yet weave. Do you hear me? I hear you. Say it back. I hear you, Rovan." He bent his head and kissed her, and the bond between them, which had been a thin rope across a wide river for 94 days, became a bridge. She felt every pulse of his for a moment laid over every pulse of her own. She felt his grief for her pour into her, and she felt her grief for him pour into him, and when they broke apart, they were both shaking so hard they could not stand without holding each other up. Soon, he said against her mouth. "I will complete this properly, when you are safe, when the house that hunted you is ash." A rustle at the tree line. Mireska stiffened. Gareth stepped out of the shadow of the pines, his coat torn, his neck bleeding from 3 long parallel cuts that were already closing, his eyes on the snow and not on either of them. He stood at a respectful distance, and he spoke only when Rovin lifted his head and permitted it. "Vesa Dravis, sire, Morwenna's younger sister, dead behind the woodpile." Rovin did not look surprised. Rovin looked for a moment like a man who had been expecting this news for a long time and was only waiting for the particulars. "Then the thing is plain," he said. "The Dravas have spent their last card in the open. We ride for Kaermor." "Sire, she should not ride. She will ride with me. No other wolf touches her." He looked down at Mireska. He did not ask her. He was not going to ask her. He only looked at her, and she understood that if she said no, he would remain in her yard until the world ended. It was her choice whether she got on a horse, or whether the realm finished falling apart around them. She thought of Henna in the lower kitchens. She thought of the twins inside her. She thought of the iron wolf that had laid itself down in her snow and refused to rise. "Together," she said. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Together. Until the last bell." They rode through the night. He held her against his chest on the back of the largest black horse she had ever seen, and she leaned against him and let herself, for the first time in 3 months, close her eyes without counting the hours. The twins were still. The mark at her throat was warm, not hot. Somewhere behind them, Gareth rode with what remained of his wolves, and somewhere ahead of them the lights of the capital came up out of the dark. They came out of the dark wrong. She felt him stiffen before she saw it. He pulled the horse up at the brow of the last hill, and she opened her eyes and looked down on Kaermor in the dawn. Smoke was rising from the eastern quarter. The great banner above the castle gates was not the gray and black of the moon throne. It was the silver serpent of House Dravas, already raised and already caught by the morning wind. A rider was galloping up the road toward them. His horse foamed at the mouth. "Sire," the rider gasped before he had even pulled up. They moved at the second bell. "Lord Malgeth has declared himself regent. 47 servants of the royal wing are to be executed at the noon bell for treason, old Henna among them." Mireska felt Rovin's arm tighten around her until she could not draw breath. "Then we do not wait for noon," he said. The outer walls of Kaermor fell in an hour. Rovin had ridden through the gates of the lower city at the head of 900 wolves, and whatever reinforcements House Dravas had bought in the night had not been prepared for the speed of their king. The Dravas men held the east gate for 12 minutes. They held the inner curtain wall for 20. By the time the bells of the second hour struck, Rovin was at the castle proper, and by the time the third bell would have struck, the gate of the castle was down. Mireska watched the fall from a protected place on the hill above the city, her hand on her belly and her other hand wrapped around the silver knife Gareth had pressed back into her palm. At 3:30, a runner came up the hill at full sprint. "Neem, mistress?" he said, and he went to one knee in the snow. "The Lord Malgeth has sealed himself into the grand hall with every hostage of the royal wing. He swears that if the king does not lay down his crown on the steps of the dais by the noon bell, the first to die will be an old kitchen woman named Henna." Mireska stood up. She did not ask her guards. She did not ask Rovin. She gathered her cloak, and she walked down the hill with a bearing that was not the bearing of the woman who had left Kaermor in a winter dusk, and the wolves sworn to her safety fell in behind her. She found him at the doors of the grand hall. He was in human form, his shoulders heaving, his hair black with blood that was not his, and Gareth and 3 other betas were physically holding him back from the doors. The moment he saw her, every one of them let go of him at once, because they knew the man they had been holding had already gone where they could not follow him. "You cannot be in this city," he said to her. "I am in it." "Mireska." "If I do nothing, Rovin, An old woman who covered my name for 6 months and handed me a silver coin in a dark kitchen is killed at the noon bell. I will not stand on a hill above this city while she dies for the crime of being kind to me." He opened his mouth. He closed it. "What will you do?" he said. "I will offer your enemy the only thing in the world that he wants more than an old woman's throat. Stand at the door and trust me, my heart. Stand at the door." She pushed open the great doors of the hall. Inside was worse than she had let herself imagine. 47 of the royal wing knelt in a long row along the floor of the hall, their hands bound. Old Henna was first in the line. She was on her knees with her gray head up, because that was the way an old woman of Caremore met a blade. Morwenna Dreva stood on the steps of the dais in a silver gown. Her father sat on the throne. "Well," said Lord Malgath Drevas, smiling as he said it. "The moon girl herself." Mireska walked halfway up the center aisle and stopped. "Let them go," she said. "I think not. Let them go, and you will have me. You will have the king's mate and his heirs and every lever over him that any enemy of the moon throne could dream of. I am worth one old nurse to you. I am worth 47 kitchen hands. Let them go." Malgath's smile did not change. "Release them," he said to his men. "Take her." The hostages were cut free. Henna would not move for a long moment. Her eyes had found Mireska's. She was shaking her head. Mireska met her eyes, and she smiled, and she mouthed a word across the distance, and the word was "thank you." And 2 of the Dreva's men had to put their hands under Henna's elbows to move her from the hall. The doors closed behind the last hostage. Rough hands closed on Mireska's arms. She did not resist. She stood between 2 Dreva's men with her head up and her hands loose, and she let the thing that had been rising in her since the tree line at her cottage keep rising. Malgath descended the dais. He was carrying a long sword, silver-edged and wet at the tip, with something that caught the torchlight wrong. She recognized the shine of Wolf's bite on the blade. "It is not the crown I came for today," he said, almost apologetically. "The crown will come. What I came for is the ending of a line. 200 years the moon line has been thought dead. 3 generations of my house have kept watch for a survivor. I would not leave the world without settling the account." He lifted the blade over her belly, and the twins inside her woke. It was not pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was the sensation of 2 small living creatures reaching, for the first time, for something they had been born already knowing how to find, and finding it, and taking hold. Mireska felt the silver in her blood answer them. It came up through her the way moonlight comes up through water. Her skin went cold, and then it went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. And the pressure of the Driva's hands on her arms was suddenly the pressure of 2 men touching a lake. At the moment it froze. They let go. They stepped back. They did not know why they were stepping back. Malgath brought the blade down. Her hand came up. It was not the hand of a scullery maid. It was not the hand of a healer of a village. It was a hand gloved in silver light and tipped with 5 pale claws, and it caught the wolf's bite sword between its fingers, and it held it there as though the blade were a child's stick. "No," she said. The doors of the grand hall exploded inward. Rovan came through them at the head of his wolves, and he was not a man. He was the black wolf again, and he was aimed at the throne. He did not stop for the Dreva's men along the aisle. He went through them. What remained of Malgath's private guard broke the moment they saw the eyes of their king. Mireska held Wolf's bite blade with a hand that was no longer quite a hand. The rest of her was going. There was no pain. There was only a folding, and a lengthening, and a quiet, like the quiet of snow falling on water. She felt her weight change. She felt the inside of her mouth rearrange itself for teeth it had not previously needed. The silver at her throat ran down her shoulders and down her flanks, and out to the tips of what had become her paws. She was not a wolf of storm water and peat smoke. She was the color of the hollow moon. Malgeth stumbled backward, his blade still clutched in a hand. Mireska's new claws had closed half through the bone of. He understood what he was looking at. He understood, a little late, what his house had been hunting for 3 generations, and what it had finally cornered. "Moonline," he whispered. She lunged. It was quick. It was quicker than any death he would have given Henna. She did not savor it. There was no appetite in her for his suffering. The silver in her blood did the thing it had been waiting 200 years to do, and then she turned from his body without looking at it twice, and she found Rovin with her eyes across the ruined hall. He had shifted back to man. He was already walking toward her. Morwenna Drevas made her last move from the steps of the dais, with a short blade drawn from the folds of her silver gown, and she did not reach either of them. Gareth, who had come through the doors a step behind his king, took her wrist in his hand and took the knife from it with the casual violence of a man who had waited a very long time for that particular pleasure. "Lady Morwenna of House Drevas," he said, "you are under the judgment of the Moon Throne." She spat at him. He did not react. Rovin reached Mireska in the center of the hall. She shifted back the way she had shifted out, without pain, as though the change had always been a door her body knew how to walk through. His cloak was around her shoulders before she was entirely woman again. She leaned against him because she could not remember how to hold her own weight just yet. "My queen," he said against her hair. "Not yet." "Then complete it." He stepped back. He tilted his head. He offered her the line of his throat, in the ancient way, as a wolf offers himself to the mate he has chosen and been chosen by. His pulse beat beneath the skin at his collar. Mireska placed her hand against it. She felt her own pulse match his in 4 beats. She pressed her mouth to the place where his neck met his shoulder. Her teeth sank in. The bond completed between them with a sound that no ear in the hall heard and every wolf in the realm felt. Mireska felt it as a door opening in a house she had lived in all her life and never known had another room. She felt Rovin's whole life pour through the door, and she felt her own pour the other way. And for one single suspended moment that was not measured in time, she stood inside both lives at once. She saw, through his eyes, the morning he woke in the ruined chamber with no memory of the day before, and a taste in his mouth he could not name. She saw herself on the riverbank of a silver river he could not cross. She saw what she had been to him from the first night in the royal gardens. Not a convenient shape, not a servant who had caught a king's eye, but a thing he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. And he, through her eyes, saw her mother in the barley field at dusk. He saw the small iron amulet with the worn crescent moon. He saw 200 years of a line that had walked the world hiding its own fire. When she released him, they were both shaking, and the wolves of Karamor were howling all around them. Morwenna Drevas was judged before the assembled packs on the 3rd day, and by the 5th, she had been put on a ship to the ice coast with a single blanket and a single loaf of bread, and the name of her house had been struck from every ledger of the realm. The kingdom began slowly to heal. The crops in the northern provinces stirred the week after the completion. The feral border packs went quiet within 9 days. Wolves who had begun to forget the shape of themselves remembered it. And Henna, who had walked out of the grand hall on the arms of 2 Drevas men and had refused to stop walking until she reached the old kitchens, sat at her long table the morning after the judgment with a clay cup of small beer in her hands, and when the new queen of Karamor sat down across from her, Henna did not stand. Henna only smiled her slow, creaking smile and said, "I wondered when you would find your grandmother's face, child." Mireska went still. "You knew. I knew your grandmother. I knew your mother. I arranged your placement in the lower kitchens the summer you were 16. I have been waiting 39 years for you to sit at this table. Why did you never tell me? Because you were not ready, and because the king was not ready to see what stood in front of him until his wolf had done the seeing first. Some things, child, cannot be told, only walked into." Mireska laid her hand across the old woman's wrist and did not speak for a long time. The twins were born on the 14th day of the new moon of spring. The boy came first. His hair was black as the peat smoke of his father's wolf. The girl came after him, and when the midwife lifted her into the light, those of the pack who had been admitted to the chamber went to one knee without being asked, because the hair of the daughter of the moon throne was the color of the hollow moon. Later that season, when Mireska was strong enough to walk, the king held a gathering in the grand hall of Karamor. The entire pack was there, every noble house, every pack leader, and every sworn wolf of the realm. They did not know what the gathering was for. They had been told only that the queen would enter from the western doors at the striking of the noon bell. The bell struck. The western doors opened, and for the first time in the history of the moon throne, it was the king who went to one knee first at the foot of the dais and waited. The pack saw their king kneeling, and they understood. 500 wolves lowered their heads to the floor at once. Mireska walked down the center aisle of the hall. She walked across the very stones she had scrubbed on the morning of the choosing. She reached her king. He rose at her touch. He turned her to face the bowed pack, and he placed the crown of the moon throne into her own hands, and she placed it upon her own head, because no hand in the realm had the right to crown a moonline daughter but her own. "Rise," she said to her people. They rose. And at the back of the hall, in the shadow of the eastern gallery where she had once hidden with her palm against her mark and her other hand on her belly, a single old kitchen woman leaned on the arm of a granddaughter she had never been known to have, and she smiled, and she said to no one at all, "There you are, child. There you are at last." Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.